Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so with Absolute Carnage being out and the fact that the story focuses on Carnage going after everybody who's ever had a symbiote, we did the first part of the first issue, right? The first issue split into 3 stories, right? It's part 1, 2, and 3. And so we're going to cover those 3 in individual parts and then, kind of go forward from there. It's released monthly, so it should give us plenty of time. But in the meantime, what I want to do here is I want to run over everybody who's ever had a symbiote, or at least how all the symbiotes function inside of Marvel Comics. That way you guys have an idea what to expect. Right? Because at this point, there's no reason not to believe that Donny Cates wouldn't just bring back all these symbiotes in some form or fashion, or at the very least, go after all those individuals who are still living, who have still had a symbiote. So you guys may end up seeing some characters that you haven't really seen before. Now, to kind of begin with the obvious, we're going to start with Venom, who's probably the most famous symbiote in all of Marvel Comics. And since the introduction of the Venom symbiote, it's actually had several hosts. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to go over the major hosts and then touch briefly on those who have hosted the symbiote for only a short amount of time. Now, the first host that we saw bonded to the Venom symbiote was actually Peter Parker. During the events of Secret Wars, Peter was actually summoned to Battleworld along with a group of Marvel's most popular heroes by the Beyonder to do battle with a group of supervillains. Now, while on Battleworld, Spider-Man's costume is damaged and he creates a new black and white costume that's able to produce webbing of its own. Now, back on Earth, Spider-Man would take the costume to Reed Richards, who would examine it and determine that it was actually a sentient alien life form and that it was simply attempting to bond to Peter. Now, later on, Peter would reject the symbiote as it would take control of his body while he was sleeping and fight crime, therefore not allowing Peter's body to rest. And so ultimately, Peter exploits the symbiote's weaknesses to sound and uses the bells in a church to drive the Venom symbiote away. Now later, a depressed and disgraced reporter named Eddie Brock would wander the same church. Eddie's career, of course, had been ruined due to him botching the biggest story of his life by revealing the wrong person to be a notorious serial killer. And so after Spider-Man later captured the real killer, Eddie Brock began to develop a hatred for him and he blamed him for ruining his career. Now sensing this hatred, the Venom symbiote sought out Eddie and bonded to him. And so Eddie would go on to be the longest tenured and most well-known host of the Venom symbiote and would fight both against and alongside Spider-Man at various times. And so eventually Eddie and the symbiote manually part ways and Eddie sells the symbiote to the highest bidder at a supervillain auction. Now the next time that we saw the Venom symbiote ended up bonding itself to Matt Gargan, previously known as a Spider-Man rogue Scorpion. Now Gargan joins Norman Osborn's Sinister 12 and later the Thunderbolts and then eventually the Dark Avengers. And Gargan is separated from the Venom symbiote following the siege on Asgard, in which the Dark Avengers were defeated and Gargan was incarcerated. Now after Peter's high school classmate Flash Thompson enlists in the army and then loses both of his legs in the Iraq War, he's approached by the US government to be a special agent. And so while on assignments, Flash is bonded with a Venom symbiote for periods of time that are shorter than 48 hours to prevent permanent bonding. And after his tenure as a government agent comes to an end, Flash joins the Avengers and later the Guardians of the Galaxy, where he eventually returns to the symbiote's home planet of Clintar, where the symbiote is purged of its impurities that caused it to do evil in the past. And so Flash eventually becomes a space knight and an agent of the cosmos and dedicates himself to keeping the peace throughout the galaxy. Now eventually, Flash is separated from the symbiote during a fight with an FBI agent wearing a high-tech suit that he uses to send the symbiote into a state of enraged confusion and forcing it to flee the battle. And so the symbiote eventually finds its way to Lee Price, a former Army Ranger turned criminal, during an illegal arms deal. And so when the symbiote finds Price, it's actually been significantly weakened and begs Price to use the symbiote for heroic purposes as Flash had done. However, Price ends up refusing this and uses the symbiote to further his life of crime before being defeated by Spider-Man and Eddie Brock and separated from the symbiote itself. Now, in addition to these primary hosts, there have been several other temporary hosts of the Venom symbiote, which we'll go through a little more quickly. The Kree warrior Tel-Kar is bonded to the symbiote shortly after its birth and uses it to infiltrate the Skrull forces during the Kree-Skrull War before being captured and separated from the symbiote itself. At one time, the symbiote attempted to bond to Ben Reilly, a clone of Peter Parker, but failed to do so. Eddie Brock's ex-wife Anne becomes She-Venom when the symbiote bonds with her to save her life after being shot by the Sin Eater, the serial killer at the center of the story that ruined Eddie Brock's career. Mafia member Don Fortunato purchases the symbiote at the supervillain auction I mentioned earlier, and it bonds to his son Angelo. Angelo ends up running from a battle with Spider-Man, and the symbiote abandons him due to his cowardice during a jump between buildings, causing him to fall to his death. Carol Danvers briefly hosts the symbiote after it's temporarily separated from Matt Gargan during the siege on Asgard. During Flash Thompson's tenure as Venom, Thunderbolt Ross comes to his apartment as the Red Hulk, and the symbiote perceives him to be a threat and bonds to him to prevent him from harming Flash. Now, incidentally, at the conclusion of Immortal Hulk number 20, it's revealed that Thunderbolt Ross is missing and that this has something to do with the brief exposure to the symbiote. Now, during the time as the Superior Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus actually engaged Flash Thompson as Agent Venom in a battle, believing him to be a supervillain. Now, where Otto attacked Venom with fire, which is one of the weaknesses of the symbiote, he separated it from Flash and ultimately captured it. When the symbiote broke free, it bonded to Otto, who was inhabiting the body of Peter Parker, who then used the symbiote to fight crime as Superior Venom before returning the symbiote to Flash after realizing the effects it had on his psyche. While Venom was with the Guardians of the Galaxy, the symbiote bonded itself to Groot, Rocket Raccoon, and Drax before the Guardians arrived on the planet Clintar, and the symbiote was once again bonded to Flash. The symbiote also briefly merges with Mercurio, the 4D man, whose evil nature counteracts the purification the symbiote had previously undergone on his home planet. And more recently, a small piece of the symbiote actually bonded with Mysterio during the Symbiote Spider-Man series to allow him to defeat Kingpin. Now, aside from Venom, the most prominent symbiote in the Marvel Universe, and the one at the center of the ongoing story, Absolute Carnage, is of course Carnage himself. Now, the Carnage symbiote was created when the Venom symbiote broke Eddie Brock out of prison, effectively making Carnage the son of Venom. The Carnage symbiote's first host was Brock's cellmate and vicious serial killer Cletus Cassidy. The symbiote's enhanced powers combined with Cletus' psychopathic nature turned Carnage into a nearly unstoppable killing machine that would plague both Spider-Man and Venom for years. Now, Carnage briefly left Cassidy to bond itself with John Jameson, the son of J. Jonah Jameson, who Carnage used to commit more murders before leaving him to bond with Spider-Man, which was at the time not Peter Parker, but his clone Ben Reilly. But Reilly was able to resist the symbiote's murderous urges and tried to destroy the symbiote by blasting it with microwaves. Now, although the symbiote was separated from Reilly, it escaped and rebonded with Cassidy. During the events of Superior Spider-Man, villains Wizard and Claw tried to bond the symbiote to a lobotomized Cletus Cassidy to use it in a team of supervillains they were forming, but ultimately failed. Instead, Carnage bonded to scientist Carl Malice, who's dubbed the Superior Carnage, and is controlled by Wizard and Claw until he turns on them and then ultimately ends up killing Claw. Now, Malice is eventually separated from Carnage by an explosion, and the symbiote briefly bonds with Wizard, and at one point while the Carnage symbiote was presumed dead, a sample of it being studied by Dr. Carla Unger bonded with her and destroyed her in the process, once again seeking out and eventually rebonding with Cassidy. Now, in the final issues of Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run, Norman Osborn steals the Carnage symbiote from a S.H.I.E.L.D. storage facility and then bonds with it. Norman then ingests the Goblin Serum, which neutralizes the traditional weakness of sound and fire, and so Norman ends up transferring part of the symbiote to his grandson Normie, but the symbiote appears to be destroyed by Spider-Man, and Harry Osborn removes most of the symbiote from Normie, although some of it does remain. Now, to get into the more nuanced parts, Carnage actually bonded to the Silver Surfer to become Carnage Cosmic, but was quickly returned to Cassidy before being sealed in a prison erroneously believed to be inescapable. Carnage also bonds with Dr. Tanis Neves after Cletus Cassidy is presumed to be dead after being ripped in half by the Sentry. Neves briefly becomes the new Carnage before Cletus is found to be alive and reclaims the symbiote for himself. However, the Carnage symbiote reproduces and the offspring bonds with Neves to create the superhero Scorn, who would later be corrupted by Null, the god of the symbiotes, and would start a cult devoted to him before being killed by Cletus Cassidy, who is the possession of another symbiote called Grendel, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now, for the other symbiotes, apart from Venom and Carnage, there are a litany of symbiotes populating the Marvel Universe. In Venom Lethal Protector, the Life Foundation tries to create a utopian society for its wealthy clients in the midst of the feared nuclear fallout from the Cold War, and they do this by attempting to create a police force to keep order by kidnapping Eddie Brock and extracting 5 offspring from the Venom symbiote. Each of the 5 offspring bond with Life Foundation security guards, Lasher with Raymond Hernandez, Phage with Carl Mock, Agony with Leslie Gesnaria, Riot with Trevor Cole, and Scream with Donna Diego. The 5 fought Venom and Spider-Man and were thought to be destroyed by an age-accelerating device, but survived due to intervention by the Life Foundation. And so Scream would eventually kill her siblings, and although the host would perish, the symbiotes themselves would survive and be taken to the Vault Super Prison and would be fused into a new symbiote that would simply call itself Hybrid. Now, Hybrid would actually bond with the Vault prison guard Scott Washington and would function as an anti-hero until being murdered by Eddie Brock in his quest to kill all the symbiotes. Now, once again, the symbiotes would survive, and during the Carnage USA miniseries, Lasher, Phage, Riot, and Agony would bond briefly with Deadpool and finally into a German Shepherd, and would technically become the new Hybrid before Null was awakened and the symbiotes separated and took over a family of 4. Moving into Daniel Way's Venom solo series, Venom was cloned by the Arat Corporation, which sought to end all life on Earth. The clone was actually derived from a piece of the original Venom's tongue, and originally refused to bond with any of the prospective hosts offered to it before briefly bonding with Alphonse Poigna, an elderly mental patient, before killing him. The clone symbiote later bonded to U.S. Army Lieutenant Patricia Robinson after killing a succession of brief hosts and attempting to bond with Wolverine. Now, Robertson adopted the name She-Venom and would set out to find and kill the original Venom, but the clone symbiote would actually abandon Robertson and merge with Eddie Brock instead. And so later, this portion of the symbiote would bond with Andy Benton, a student of Flash Thompson's, when he attempted to give her part of his Venom symbiote to save her life after she was poisoned by Jack-O-Lantern, and Andy embraced the symbiote's power and adopted the name Mania, and initially used it to fight crime, but was later corrupted by a demonic force called the Hellmark, and she began murdering criminals. Now Flash eventually absorbed the Mania symbiote until the Hellmark could be suppressed, and then returned it to Andy. And Andy was most recently seen being attacked by Cletus Cassidy in the lead up to Absolute Carnage, but she survived and then went to warn Eddie of Cassidy's plan to collect the genetic code of symbiote hosts to free Null from his prison. Now Andy was eventually separated from Mania by Lee Price, who used a flamethrower to exploit the symbiote's weakness to fire, and Price took the symbiote for himself and then adopted the name Maniac. Now Price was eventually imprisoned for his crimes and was visited in prison by Cletus Cassidy, masquerading as Eddie Brock, who in turn killed Price and took the Mania symbiote for himself. Now, another offspring of the Venom symbiote was actually created when the symbiote once again tried to bond with Eddie Brock. Now, Brock, who had recently been cured of cancer, was attacked by Venom's host, Matt Gargan. Now, when the symbiote touched Eddie Brock, the antibodies that were produced by Brock's white blood cells charged with the light force energy used to cure his cancer, and a new symbiote known as Anti-Venom was formed. The Anti-Venom symbiote does not have the weaknesses of fire and heat that most symbiotes possess, and can also produce antibodies to treat a variety of illnesses. And so Eddie would actually carry the Anti-Venom symbiote until it sacrificed itself to heal a group of infected with the spider virus during the Spider Island storyline. And so the Anti-Venom symbiote was seen once again when it was used to create a serum to treat the toxic shock syndrome plaguing the Venom symbiote, and Flash Thompson was given the serum and became Anti-Venom during the Venom Inc. storyline. Now when Carnage learned that he was going to produce an offspring of his own, he resolved to kill the spawn as soon as he was born, but was too weak to do so. Instead, he bonded the symbiote called Toxin to a New York City police officer named Patrick Mulligan in order to hide the symbiote from Venom, who was seeking it out as a potential partner. Now as the Toxin symbiote grew stronger, Venom and Carnage realized that they needed to join forces in order to destroy it, but Toxin was saved by Spider-Man's intervention, and after some time with the symbiote, Mulligan is murdered by Blackheart, who bonds fragments of the symbiote to clones of X-23. And so eventually, the Crime Master captures Eddie Brock and bonds him to the Toxin symbiote, who keeps it until he sacrifices Toxin to stop Carnage from resurrecting the Dark Elder God Chthon. Following this, Carnage's quest to revive Chthon also resulted in the creation of another offspring named Raze, who bonded to FBI agent Claire Dixon and a sailor named Jubilee von Scott before being destroyed during the banishment of Chthon. And so most recently, Donny Cates has introduced a lot of new lore to the symbiote race in the lead up to Absolute Carnage. Grendel is a dragon-like symbiote and one of the earliest created by Null to consume entire civilizations throughout the galaxy. Grendel's first run-in with Earth during the Viking Age, where it was defeated by Thor and entombed in a glacier. However, pieces of Grendel made their way to Earth and bonded with various hosts to lay the foundation of the cult of Null. Now Grendel would later be found and unthawed by S.H.I.E.L.D. and fragments that would be used to try and create a new super soldier program during the Vietnam War. One of the 5 fragments was codenamed Tyrannosaurus and would bond with wounded soldier Rex Strickland. Rex and the rest of the soldiers bonded with the pieces of Grendel were overcome with bloodlust, and Wolverine and what seemed to be Nick Fury, but was in reality a life model decoy, were sent to stop the group of Sim soldiers. Now eventually the Tyrannosaurus symbiote separated from Rex and briefly bonded with Logan before being separated from him by Rex. And so when Fury's life model decoy self-destructed to kill any witnesses, the symbiote once again bonded with Rex to save him, having been moved by his compassion. However, ultimately, Rex didn't survive, and instead, the piece of the Grendel symbiote began adopting his appearance and identity. And so the Tyrannosaurus symbiote would later fight alongside Venom against Null and sacrifice itself in an attempt to destroy Null unsuccessfully. And so Grendel was subsequently collected by the Maker, the Ultimate Universe version of Reed Richards, before being stolen from him by the cult of Null. And as far as we know, Grendel is currently bonded to host Cletus Cassidy, who also used it to resurrect Emil Gregg, the man misidentified as a Sin Eater by Eddie Brock, who's been sent to destroy Eddie. So yeah. There's a ton of symbiotes in the Marvel Universe, and it's very complicated, and it's a huge mess. It's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest with you guys. A lot of that really took place in the 1990s and the early 2000s. It's been kind of bonkers. That's one of the reasons why I love Donny Cates' run, because he's sort of clearing it all up. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.